The Aborigines of Australia by Mariah Abel. Here is demonstrated a map of early human migration 10,000 years ago. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders migrated from Africa to Asia, then on to Australia 50,000 years ago. Comprised of hundreds of groups residing in varying demographic areas of Australia, their culture is the oldest living culture in the world. Before 1788, it is estimated that there were approximately 200 to 250 different languages spoken by Aboriginal people living throughout Australia. Key territorial landmarks and boundaries such as rivers, mountains, and lakes differentiated the varying language groups. Aboriginal people were originally coastal dwellers, establishing settlements near resourceful waterways. As time went on, more communities were driven inwards to deserts, where they became semi-nomadic, hunting and gathering food. Native Australian Aborigines are a resilient people who have survived ages due to their strong belief in religious and cultural heritage. Storytelling, dance, painting, and ceremony are important elements of Aboriginal cultures as they maintain law and lore. Aborigines have the longest continuous cultural history of any group of people on Earth. Dreamtime is the universal law of the indigenous people in which sacred stories of creation, land formations, medicinal remedies, and animal behavior are passed down through song, dance, and ceremonies. Along with respect of folklore and tradition, Aboriginals uphold familial and kinship relationships, which are defined by sets of responsibilities, guidelines, and entitlements. In January of 1788, British ships invaded the east coast of Australia, exiling natives from their homelands. The continued loss of the land the Aborigines experienced greatly affected their social and physical well-being. As you can see here in the illustration, they're in chains, so they were enslaved. The British also introduced waves of disease, killing thousands and thus greatly reducing the native population. As this illustration demonstrates, the British also brought smallpox and many other diseases to the Australian territories. There were attempts to eradicate the native culture by removing Aboriginal children from their homes and placing them with white families or in boarding schools. This picture demonstrates a person who ran away after they were captured and tried to go back to their homeland. These factors increase poor treatment and violence toward Native Aboriginal people who were viewed as second-class citizens. Social determinants that pertain to Aboriginal and Torres Strait people include their connection to land, which is very strong, and the history of being forced from their traditional lands and away from their families. Health disparities between non-Indigenous and Indigenous Australians exist as a direct result of inadequate opportunities of education, employment, income, and socioeconomic status. Because they were considered second class and therefore had a decreased socioeconomic status for so long, this did have a great effect on them being able to obtain education, employment, and income, and thus that created different problems for them. Ever since the British invasion, the indigenous population of Australia has struggled immensely. Much of their land was stolen or destroyed, and their people were either killed by disease, war, or hate. There were countless and often relentless attempts to dismantle their culture by ways of racism and violence from incoming communities wanting nothing more than acquisition of their land. Indigenous Australians have poorer health than other Australians and are more likely to die at younger ages. Indigenous Australians are more likely to partake in high-risk behaviors such as smoking, poor nutrition, physical inactivity, and alcohol consumption due to the stresses and other factors that have created these environments for them. Leading causes of death for Indigenous Australians include coronary heart disease, diabetes, chronic lower respiratory disease, and other respiratory cancers. Cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Cardiovascular disease, also commonly known as heart disease, is a condition that develops due to a plaque buildup within the walls of arteries, causing constrained blood flow. Poor diet and exercise can lead to heart disease, which in turn may develop into other serious health issues, including heart attack, stroke, arrhythmia, and ultimately heart failure. Indigenous Australians often partake in unhealthy habits such as poor nutrition and smoking, and are provided fewer medical and educational resources as their income and location pose challenges. Some of the native Aboriginal people still live on the outskirts of their communities and often poor areas where they don't have the opportunity to go directly to a hospital or to a doctor because they aren't close to one and they may not have the resources to get there. So that does pose a problem for their health. Gap in cardiovascular disease death rates between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders and non-Indigenous people deceased between 1998 and 2014. Although the health of Indigenous people continues to improve, there are advancements that may further close the gap of good health between the Indigenous population and the Indigenous populations would greatly benefit from more acceptable and readily available healthcare services, greater cultural competence of healthcare providers, better identification of health issues before they progress, and institution of healthcare policies and procedures.